Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever this is finding you. I hope you're well. Welcome to the 31st Emerging Growth Conference. I'm Anna Berry. I'll be your host today. So as always, we have an exciting list of companies in a wide range of growth sectors presenting to you today. All of our conferences are uploaded to the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel. So please subscribe. youtube.com/emerging growth conference. And just a few notes. So today we'll be running until 3 p.m. Eastern time. When we switch to the next company, you're going to see a black screen for a moment. Don't go anywhere. It's just us moving over to the next presenter. But if you do experience downtime for more than a minute, refresh your browser and everything should work properly again. Now, our platform does work best on Google Chrome. So if you're watching from an Apple device, you have to hit the play button to start the session. So during each company's presentation, you can submit questions through our webcast module, and the presenters will try to address as many of these at the end of their presentation. One last note, after today's event, you'll be redirected to the registration page for the next conference. So stay on or come back early to reserve your spot. Today, we have 9 companies presenting. So without further ado, I will introduce our first. Please welcome Cardiol Therapeutics Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol CRDL and on the TSX under the symbol CRDL, and is a clinical stage life sciences company focused on the research and clinical development of cannabinoid and an anti-fibrotic and anti-inflammatory therapy for the treatment of cardiovascular disease. Please welcome its CEO, David Elsley. Welcome, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having us here today. It's a great, very thrilled to have the opportunity to present to your audience.
Good. We look forward to hearing your presentation. So the floor is yours, sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, folks. It's a great pleasure to, for those that are new to the Cardiol story, to introduce you to the great work we're doing in heart medicine. And for those that are familiar, to provide you an update on the progress we're making, which during a year which promises to be very exciting for Cardiol Therapeutics. For those not familiar, Cardiol Therapeutics, the team here has worked in heart failure medicine for many, many years, bringing decades of experience to this very important field. Heart failure remains a tragic disease. It is an epidemic of sorts. It continues to rise in terms of prevalence and incidence as a result of the underlying driving forces, which is diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity, factors that are rising in the developed world. And this is creating an ever-increasing burden on the healthcare system caused by heart disease in general and heart failure more specifically. And we are privileged to be working in this important area and trying to make a difference for patients around the world. So at Cardiol, we are developing a novel therapeutic strategy to target fibrotic and inflammatory processes or pathological processes which underlie and are causing, contributing to this major problem of heart disease. You'll hear about our scientific rationale today, our growing late-stage pipeline, which includes now a new orphan drug indication, which we're very excited about, that was just recently announced. I'll provide backgrounds on our leadership team, advisory panels, which I believe are second to none in this industry. Touch on the clinical programs in some detail, strong intellectual property, as well as our strong financial position, which we're very fortunate to be in, given the challenges of the current climate in the investment community. Basically, the molecule we're developing as an anti-fibrotic agent is cannabidiol. The first discovery of prominence in the area of cardiac disease was made at the National Institute of Health and published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and basically demonstrated the ability of this molecule to uniquely reverse or ameliorate fibrotic and inflammatory processes in models of diabetic-induced heart failure. The scientific literature is now rich with evidence from labs around the world concerning the anti-fibrotic and anti-inflammatory properties of this interesting medicine that we are developing pharmaceutically. Importantly, we've developed a pure oral formulation for the acute inflammatory conditions in cardiac area, and we're developing a very innovative new subcutaneous formulation to advance in the chronic heart failure space. With respect to our pipeline, we have a phase 2/3 program looking at cardiac inflammation secondary to viral infection that is advancing in North America and South America. We have two acute programs looking at orphan target clinical indications, both acute myocarditis and recurrent pericarditis, both tragic diseases because they basically attack a younger, otherwise generally healthy population and lead to significant mortality in that area. And then we have a novel subcutaneous formulation addressable to one of the largest medical markets in the world today, which is heart failure. Second, perhaps only in size and scope to conditions such as diabetes or Alzheimer's disease. And extraordinarily costly to care for. Heart failure costs the US healthcare system annually over $30 billion because of the frequency of hospital admissions. But I'll start today with our most recently announced program, which is a cardiac orphan indication, recurrent pericarditis. This is a condition which basically manifests itself, or initially symptomatic, the primary symptom is chest pain. In a patient population, usually in their 40s, generally fairly healthy population. This is basically inflammation of the sac that surrounds the heart. Current treatment options are extraordinarily costly. Many of them are immunosuppressive in nature, and certain patients don't respond to certain available therapies. So there remains a need for better forms of treatment to deal with the recurrent condition of this inflammatory state. We've just recently announced FDA clearance for a 25-patient open-label pilot study, which we will run at major tertiary referral centers in the United States. And the primary endpoint here is basically change from baseline over 8 weeks of recurrent pericarditis pain on an 11-point numerical rating scale, which is widely recognized to be the standard by which diagnosis and prognosis and improvements or deterioration in this condition are measured. We'll also look at 26 weeks at other markers such as change in inflammatory status in these patients, with a widely recognized marker of cardiac inflammation being C-reactive protein. This study will be open label. We will titrate patients up to a relatively high dose, which is 10 mg per kilo of cannabidiol. And if you think about that in relative terms, many of you who are familiar with this form of medicine may think about 100 milligrams a day being a relatively high dose. Here we're giving 10 per kilo of body weight. So patients with 70 kilos would get 700 milligrams of drug a day by way of example. So we look forward to getting this study underway. We are now basically going through recruitment of clinical trial centers and look forward to initiating this trial. In terms of the prevalence of this condition, it is recognized as an orphan indication. For those who may not be familiar with the orphan drug legislation provided in the United States as well as other major jurisdictions around the world, basically the pharmaceutical industry is incentivized to develop new important therapies for rare and very serious life-threatening diseases by providing companies with prolonged periods of market exclusivity, which in the United States can run 7 to 9 years, and other jurisdictions up to 10 years in the world. So by developing this, the companies are rewarded with basically a monopoly position in the market in return for developing conditions for rare diseases. More importantly, these diseases can be very economically important because they're very costly to treat and have a very tragic impact in terms of quality of life and on folks' standard of living. The orphan drug industry, albeit rare disease, is not insignificant. It's expected to grow up to $255 billion in annual revenues by 2026. Running in parallel with our important program in recurrent pericarditis is also a program that we're ramping up clinical centers around the world, which is acute myocarditis. Acute myocarditis is a particularly tragic form of heart muscle inflammation because it attacks young people. It is the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 30 or under the age of 35 in general. So a typical patient would be a male in their 20s who is otherwise healthy. It's primarily caused by a viral infection, which activates the immune system against the infection, and that can lead to an immunological attack on cardiac tissue, which can lead to fibrosis. This is a prominent cause of cardiac transplantation in a young population. It can lead to fulminant heart failure in these patients and very lengthy and costly ICU stays. What encouraged us to pursue this is really the demonstration of cannabidiol's cardioprotective impact against this insidious insult by the immune system on cardiac tissue. On this slide, you see normal cardiac tissue on the left. One panel over, you see basically tissue magnified about 100 times, which basically that red scarring is fibrosis, or regions of the heart that are dying and becoming fibrotic. So the heart loses its elasticity and can't function properly as a pump. On the right, in the presence of myocarditis with concomitant treatment with the cannabidiol drug, you'll see that substantially all of the tissue is protected or preserved against the immune insult. And we believe this is very exciting because unfortunately, acute myocarditis has no recognized standard of care. So in advanced cases or persistent cases, steroids are used sparingly, but not all patients respond to steroids, and their toxicity really limits their use on long term. This trial is designed to enroll 100 patients at 35 to 40 centers around the world. We'll be using the gold standard for measuring prognosis and change in the condition by using MRI to highly precisely measure left ventricular ejection fraction of the performance of the heart, extracellular volume, which is volume outside of the cells of the heart, which is an index of myocarditis, and global longitudinal strain, another well-recognized marker of measuring improvements or deterioration in this condition. Secondary measures are classical safety, improvement in cardiac function, and improvement in quality of life. This is a randomized placebo-controlled trial. Patients will be randomized to either receive titration of dose of Cardiol RX from 2.5 mg per kilo up to 10 mg per kilo max dose, or placebo. And the primary endpoint will be measured at 12 weeks. We've ramped up centers in many countries, and we look forward to initiating enrollment in this trial in the very near future, or imminently, actually. This trial was designed by a panel of key opinion leaders in acute myocarditis and heart failure medicine and cardiac transplantation. This is an international committee comprising key opinion leaders from the United States, Brazil, Germany, Canada, who have independently designed this trial, which was filed with the cardiorenal panel of the FDA, and cleared for initiation. And we look forward to getting the study underway imminently. And then running in parallel with the two cardiac orphans is another very important trial where we're studying, this is really a gateway trial where we have this opportunity to study the impact of our drug on cardiac inflammation secondary to viral infection. And in this case, this is an infection you all know, or this viral infection you all know all too well, which is the COVID virus. Importantly, 70% of patients who are hospitalized have underlying cardiovascular disease or prominent risk factors, such as diabetes or hypertension. There's really no treatment in the treatment regimen currently for that patient who becomes hospitalized, because at that stage, they've typically failed early onset treatments, and they're at high risk for progression to ICU and suffering major cardiovascular complications. This slide just demonstrates early on in the pandemic the distinguishing factor between someone with cardiovascular disease or a prior history of cardiac injury versus a patient population with no prior history of cardiac injury. And you can see on this survival curve, which is a Kaplan-Meier, each step down on the curve. So y-axis is percent survival. So at day 0, we have 100% surviving. And then each step down on this curve is increasing mortality. And you'll see the patients at high risk for cardiovascular complications, so those with prior history of cardiac injury, have about a 50% mortality. And this was with the alpha variant. Whereas those with no history of cardiac injury have survival rates of 80 or 98%. This was the first signal of the possibility of using this as a human model of cardiac inflammation and an opportunity to demonstrate or confer cardioprotection in this setting. The study is randomizing up to 422 patients. This trial is operational in the United States, Brazil, and Mexico. Primary endpoints here, we're looking at major cardiorespiratory complications, such as heart attack and stroke. We're also looking at secondary endpoints, important markers of cardiac inflammation. which can provide important read-throughs into the impact of this drug on inflammation in the cardiovascular setting. This as well is a one-to-one randomized trial. So patients are randomized to either receive titration of dose of Cardiol Rx, our pure pharmaceutically reduced cannabidiol formulation, or placebo. And the primary endpoint is measured at 28 weeks. And then we also have a 60-day follow-up. Like the myocarditis program, we assembled a steering committee comprising thought leaders in heart failure medicine, cardiac inflammation from around the world to independently design this trial that was then sanctioned by the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the governments of Mexico and Brazil. So that's the major programs in the acute inflammatory setting in cardiovascular disease, but we also have a very important program addressable to chronic inflammation in the area of heart medicine, which is heart failure. Heart failure, by any measure, is a major medical problem affecting up to 26 million people in the developed world. Half of all heart failure patients have diastolic heart failure, or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which is, in simplistic terms, an impairment of the ability of the heart to relax and fill properly. 30 to 50% mortality rate within 1 to 5 years, making the diagnosis of heart failure in terms of prognosis similar to many forms of advanced cancer. And it is a primary cause of hospital admission and readmission. Patients have a striking decline in their quality of life, are hospitalized frequently, and this drives about $30 billion in healthcare expenditures in the US each year alone. As mentioned earlier, what happens in diastolic heart failure, unlike systolic, where you have a pump dysfunction, in diastolic heart failure, we get this fibrous thickening in the ventricle muscle, which inhibits the ability of the heart to relax properly, and it doesn't fill efficiently. So the heart does not have enough blood to pump to meet metabolic demand. We worked with the world-renowned DeBakey Heart Center, the home of the first heart transplant ever performed in the United States. And together we've innovated a new way to deliver this important medicine more efficiently to inflammation in the cardiac tissue. And this is a subcutaneous form of this medicine that'll be delivered much like insulin. So it goes directly into the systemic circulation, so it can more efficiently accumulate at sites of disease. And the first evidence of the efficiency of this route administration were accepted for presentation at the 2020 American College of Cardiology sessions. And here we're looking at the impact on BNP, which is a key marker of cardiac stretch, elevated in heart failure patients. And here in this model of non-ischemic heart failure, we measured the impact of 2 dosing regimens on this key marker of heart failure. So you can see in the control, or you get the elevated BNP in the control, and then at 10 mg per kilo dosing, which is the FDA-approved maintenance dosing regimen for cannabidiol in the epilepsy setting, we reduced BNP. But equally important, or perhaps more important, when we went to 1/10 of that dose, we still had a significant reduction in BNP, underscoring what we believe to be the improved efficiency of delivering this medicine. At 1/10 of the known therapeutic dose, we're still reducing a key marker of heart failure. This observation was also manifested in terms of the impact of this therapeutic regimen was also shown to impact the fibrotic process in this non-ischemic model. So in this model, we induce hypertension by infusing angiotensin. That creates a hypertensive resistance in the cardiovascular system. The heart then pumps against that vascular resistance and becomes fibrotic and enlarged because of the resistance. On the left, you see normal control tissue. That tissue is healthy. One panel in, the bluish staining, are fibrotic or fibrosis forming in the heart because of the angiotensin resistance put on the heart. One panel over at 10 mg per kilo, and then again at 1 mg per kilo, we're ameliorating, preventing that fibrotic process from setting in. We believe this is a very striking observation that, if manifested in man in human studies, we believe would represent a breakthrough in the treatment of one of the largest medical problems facing the developed world today. So the major objectives we've set for this organization over the next very exciting 12 to 18 months is to complete and report on the Lancer trial, to initiate 2 important cardiac orphan programs, and advance the enrollment into those trials, to advance our subcutaneous formulation into clinical development with an ideal clinical target being diastolic heart failure, and to continue to drive forward on our discovery research, looking at other areas of cardiotoxicity and cardiac inflammation and fibrosis in the cardiac setting. And we also have other novel assets that we're developing to trigger other inflammatory pathways important in the heart failure pathology. Our management team combines 30 years of experience in development of important new therapeutics from all the various disciplines. Dr. Andrew Hammer is our Chief Medical Officer, coming from 20 years of senior advanced heart failure medicine practice, also a widely regarded clinical trialist, having been the head of over 40 multi-center clinical trials or involved in up to 40 multi-center clinical trials. He then spent 6 years at Amgen in the cardiometabolic division, heading their largest program, which was the Repatha program. Chris Waddick, veteran financial affairs officer, our chief financial officer with 30 years of very senior financial roles, including 15 years as CFO of a life sciences company. Andrea Parker has run several major clinical programs in heart failure medicine. Bernard Lim has scaled the production of multiple drugs through to commercialization. And Ann Tomlin's an extraordinary talent on the regulatory side, having shepherded many drugs through complex regulatory environments around the world. Our board is international and independent. Dr. Guillermo Torri is an immunologist, cardiologist, heart failure specialist, also runs a very large research and development organization at Texelou in Monterrey. Jennifer Chow is a recent addition to our board, bringing expertise on the strategy side, as well as Wall Street experience, having been a life sciences analyst for many years. Colin Stote's a pharmacologist, one of the early employees of GW Pharma. He was part of the team that developed the first cannabidiol-based medicine approved by the FDA in 2018, and that organization was acquired for over $7 billion about a year and a half ago. Terry Luxem, another recent addition, extraordinary talent to our board, with extraordinary expertise from the pharmaceutical industry, with experience from Merck, Bristol Myers, as well as development stage biotechnology companies. Peter Picos is a veteran of the pharmaceutical industry. He developed Dalton Pharmaceuticals from the ground up, and that's our global partner for all of our chemistry innovations and our drug development. And Michael Wilner is a very accomplished businessman, also an attorney, as well as a CPA, and brings financial acumen and business expertise to the board on an independent basis. Our scientific advisory board comprises extraordinary talent in cardiovascular medicine. Paul Ridker really needs no introduction, widely published on in the area of cardiac inflammation and its impact and involvement in atherosclerosis. Bruce McManus, heart failure specialist, myocarditis expert, has studied for 3 decades the pathological processes underlying heart failure medicine. And Dr. Joseph Hill, editor-in-chief of the journal Circulation for the American Heart Association, widely recognized as one of the foremost experts in the world today in diastolic heart failure, or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. We're also fortunate to have strong insider involvement in our capital structure at 11%, and 4% represented by our pharmaceutical partner. We also have a strong financial position with $75 million in the bank as at end of Q1, which provides capital to underpin all of the development programs through to completion that you've heard about today. So just in summary, we have a very unique molecule with profound properties in terms of its anti-fibrotic activity and anti-inflammatory activity, married up with an extraordinary safety profile that's now been borne out in the treatment of thousands of patients. We have a strong scientific rationale from labs around the world underpinning the ability of this molecule to confer cardioprotection and tissue preservation effects in a broad range of experimental models of cardiac disease. We have a strong research pipeline, a strong clinical pipeline. We have a strong leadership team, a growing family of intellectual property providing a moat for Cardiol for years to come and protect our growing position in this very important area of cardiac inflammation. And we're very pleased to be in a very strong financial position to execute across all of our strategic areas in the coming 2 years, which we're very excited about. So with that, that's an overview on cardio. If time permits, I'd be more than happy to address any questions from the audience.
Thank you, David. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but this is a fascinating subject matter, and you have some great products there. So we certainly hope that you'll come back and join us again. We do have tons of questions from our audience, so we're going to send them directly to you so you can answer them on your own time. But thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for this presentation today.
That's great. Thanks very much for having us.
All right. Okay, everyone, stay with us. We're going to transition to the next presenter, and we'll be right back.